Welcome to the March 2019 meeting of the Houston.net Users Group. You're welcome to join us in person for pizza, prizes, and networking on the second Thursday of every month. Our meetings are hosted by Improving Houston in their office at 10111 Richmond Avenue, just inside the Beltway in Houston's West Chase District. You can check us out for meeting notifications at HDNUG.org, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. And now, a word from our sponsor, Neudesic. At Neudesic, passion for technology drives us, but it's innovation that defines us. From design to development and support to management, Neudesic offers decades of experience, proven frameworks, and a disciplined approach to quickly deliver reliable, quality solutions that help you go to market faster and get a leg up on your competition. We'll help you leverage the cloud to reduce costs and increase flexibility, process and analyze big data faster to improve decision making, expand market reach with enterprise-ready mobile solutions, integrate systems and applications to enhance productivity, and monetize APIs and other digital assets to boost revenue. And now for our featured speaker, Eric Huckabay, who asked the question, do you have technical debt?
I am an improving guy.
Did you improve?
I have been known to improve. I'm also a former Neudesic guy. Spent about 5 years there, as Lisa mentioned. I can definitely vouch for the quality of Neudesic people and consultants and the experience I had there. So, but I'll talk a little bit more about myself momentarily. Some pieces to get out of the way early on. Let me just make sure that the screen comes up before I get started. All right. I'm a relatively comfortable speaker. Y'all are welcome to heckle. You're welcome to speak up, interrupt, have questions during the presentation. You're not going to throw me off my game. I am happy to interact with the audience. Okay? Yes. Everybody good with that?
Yes.
All right.
Is it a challenge?
What's that?
Is this a challenge?
You are welcome to take it as a challenge. I will say that I have had Devlin in my audience more than once, and he does take it as a challenge. So there you go. All right, my presentation tonight is on technical debt. So I think that, as Jay mentioned, you're all pretty familiar with the concept, right? Everybody?
Yes.
Yes, okay. High energy, come on. But I like to always start with motivating my talks, so we'll start there. So has anybody in this room ever been on a project that has fallen apart under the weight of the project? Under the weight of bad decisions or incredibly baroque architectures that just can't work together, or because somebody thought they knew generally what we should build, so we just built stuff and saw if it was the right thing, and then, it turned out that it wasn't? Anybody ever been on a project where you succeeded at the project and the customer decided not to continue using it because it was too much of a pain to continue to maintain?
My part worked.
My part worked, exactly. Right? So there's a trade-off here, and I think that we're probably all fairly familiar with this trade-off of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We actually need to shift software. We are never going to design the perfect, completely graceful, completely elegant solution. And yet, if we throw something together, we're going to get garbage out of our systems, right? Everybody on board with that? Everybody can feel that from their past experience?
Yes.
All right. So that should get us started. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. So this is me and my son with the tough guy look. I have been known to create tech debt in the past. If I'm looking to flatter myself, I might consider myself a pragmatic programmer. I also have some interesting experience in the past around debt in general. And I'm going to talk a lot with debt as our metaphor tonight. So I want to sort of credentialize in that regard too. I actually worked for a hedge fund called Bridgewater, which some of you may have heard of. Ray Dalio is the founder of Bridgewater, is sort of a big name in hedge funds, has a bunch of YouTube videos around how money works, debt, etc. My mom was super thrifty, never made more than about $30,000 a year in her entire career. And her mom was known to always keep the receipts when she went to the store because she lived through the Great Depression and wanted to be able to use that scrap paper in case she needed it. On the other hand, my dad was the kind of person who went out to eat every night, never really kept any money in the bank, spent what he made. He was also the kind of guy who, anytime he would go into a restaurant, there'd be somebody who'd be like, "Hey, Dwayne!" He worked for the city of Houston and managed the budget of the city of Houston, which is why we got to where we are now. All right. So, here's what we're going to talk about tonight in brief. We're going to talk about what do we mean by technical debt. I think you've all got a pretty good sense for that, so we won't linger on it very long. But I want to sort of cast a new light on that for some of you. We'll talk about what is good debt versus bad debt. Talk about some of the consequences of debt and some of the consequences of trying to fix debt. We'll then take a look at how do we decide when is it worth fixing the debt and when is it worth keeping the debt. Okay? And finally, I will give you some resources on where you can look at some other opinions on managing technical debt, etc. So, moving on. What is technical debt? Every time we build something that works but isn't optimal and promise ourselves that we're going to go back and fix it later, that is technical debt. Has anybody ever made that promise to yourself? Okay. But what's fun is we can also incur technical debt retroactively. Has anybody come to a system and said, if I could just go back in time, I would have written that differently?
Yes.
If I just had the skills that I have now, if they had just invented that framework, if I had just been able to use Angular 7 rather than Angular JS when I build that web app, I would have done this completely differently. Has anybody ever been on a project where you've actually had to rewrite the same thing that you've written before? Did you do it the same way? I've written a couple of loan processing systems, loan servicing systems, and I can tell you that I wrote the second one a whole lot differently than I wrote the first one. It's kind of painful to live with that knowledge that we could have done it better, right? We notice it. We think about the fact that we didn't write it perfectly. And because developers are anal people, that tends to bother us. I know, we're shocked, right? Surely not. Nobody is detail-oriented in this room, right?
Or obsessive compulsive.
Okay. So let's talk about good debt and bad debt. When should you pay off your loans early? Anybody?
On cars? When it's
Well,
worth it.
yeah.
When it's worth it. Good answer.
When
The
you have
other
a high
consulting answer, and you'll be safe with this answer in every situation, is it depends.
When you have a high interest rate.
When you have a high interest rate relative to what else you could do with the money, right?
Alternate economic.
If you have a 0%
So-
interest rate,
If you have a zero interest rate, you could make more money by keeping that free money they've given you, investing it somewhere, bringing it back. What's the other factor other than return, Jay?
Risk.
All right, there we go.
What? What is
People
it?
were paying attention in their finance classes. That's awesome. Yes. So, think about that in terms of your tech debt, right? You're going to have some risk that you're taking. You're going to have some return on those investments of the debt that you're taking out. What is the return on the investment for most tech debt?
Huge.
Shipping. We don't usually incur tech debt because we feel like it, right? We don't usually incur tech debt because we're lazy developers. I don't know. Maybe some of you are. I'm never lazy. No, wait. Laziness is good, right? Isn't that what makes us not repeat ourselves? Isn't that what makes
that's
us
one of the
find
that's one of the
the-
attributes of a good developer is laziness.
Exactly. But nonetheless, we don't generally ship bad code because we're lazy, because we're smart lazy. We know that that's going to cost us more in the long term, right? It's going to make more work for us. The project that I'm currently on, before I got onto the project, had a single full-time developer whose half of his job was fixing the constant issues that were coming up because of the structure of the code. Literally half of his job, 20 hours a week, just to keep the thing running. The other thing that I want to talk to you about a little bit is the time value of money. So when you think about it, how does timing affect money? If we can wait to do something till the optimal time, do we pay more money or less money?
More money.
If we can wait to the optimal time, we pay more money? If we get the perfect time, we can pay it off all at once and not have to finance it, right? We can get the most leverage out of our money. We can choose to wait for it to be on sale, right? If I'm going to go in and fix a code problem, and I go do it without having looked at the code recently, it's going to take me longer than if I've just had to dive into learning that code because I need to make some enhancement to it. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So if I can wait for the perfect time to make that fix, maybe I shouldn't make it now. If you have ample savings, you get choices. You get the opportunity to say, I'm going to pay this off in small pieces, or I'm going to pay this off all at once. Do you see how that would relate to tech debt? Is that ringing any bells or causing any wheels to turn for anybody? When you have leverage, when there's time to do the work, when you're not up against a market deadline, when the market's willing to pay for it, then you can take that on. Now, there are some problems with tech debt, right? Where the debt is somewhat self-fulfilling, where when you get into a situation where you've already got debt, you sometimes wind up in situations where you're forced to incur more debt. Has anybody ever been on a project where you know the right way to do this, and you don't have time to implement it because you took a shortcut sometime before and you'd have to completely rewrite that thing to do this thing the right way?
Or someone else wrote it.
Or someone else wrote it, because we never do that, right?
I mean, I've had cases where I've come in to do a very limited thing, and then I'm stuck by some of
The architectural choices,
that's not what I was going to call them, but we can work with that.
Fiduciary mismanagement.
Absolutely. So there is a problem where when you get into debt, you have less room to move, less room to make decisions. And so you may not be able to make that decision to shortcut things, get things done the right way, whatever the right decision is right now. And then there's the emotional cost of debt, right? Debt is something you have to worry about. You know you've made that promise to yourself that I'm going to go clean this up someday. How many of you have fulfilled all of those promises to yourself? How many of you have fulfilled most of those promises to yourself?
No.
Can I work for you if you have? And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about the problem of overlapping debt. So there's a concept called the theory of constraints. Most of the people in the room may be familiar with it, but the idea is go work at the bottleneck, right? Expand the bottleneck because that will make the greatest impact on the throughput of the system. If you don't work at the bottleneck, you're expanding something that's not going to get used anyway because there's something else preventing work from getting to the point that you've just expanded the capacity of. So, the problem with that is that if you have multiple bottlenecks that are close to each other in throughput, expanding the first bottleneck is not going to help you much. You're going to have an upward cap on how much you can improve things by increasing that throughput. So fixing this tech debt may just mean that you find out that now you're limited by that tech debt over there. And that seems like a dangerous thing. Ideally, when we're talking about debt, as Jay pointed out, we want to know what's the return and what's the risk. Right? So the problem is that debt is a drag. It slows us down. It makes us inefficient. As we work through our technical debt, we are forced to do things slower and in ways that we wouldn't otherwise do them. We're forced to spend more time learning the code. The code is less maintainable, and therefore we have to spend more time understanding it in order to fix it, add things to it, understand the complexity of the system. Now, I know that we have some really good principles here that help us keep things simple. Don't repeat yourself. Single responsibility principle, open close principle. And I'm sure that everybody in this room works on systems that were designed entirely obeying those solid principles, right? Wow, not even a laugh.
No, I did. Smart.
Okay?
No, I
It'd be
understand,
great.
sir.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I'm very sorry to interrupt what's going on here. I have a scheduled inspection. It's going to take like 2 minutes.
Sure.
These lights may go out,
Not a problem.
but it shouldn't affect any of the receptacles or any of that stuff.
Sounds
Bear
good.
with me.
Thank you, sir. So, it creates inefficiency, right? It would be nice if we had done every bit of work that we've ever done following interface segregation, single responsibility principle, knowing who the information owner is. Anybody actually implemented double dispatch? A few times, probably. Maybe not on every system. Anybody, can anybody even define double dispatch in the room? Okay.
No.
Might want to look up double dispatch. It's a cool idea, but not what we're going to talk about tonight. The other problem with that debt is what we talked about earlier. It's that cognitive burden. The more debt you get, the more you have to think, the more you have to keep it in the back of your mind whenever you're changing anything else, so that that debt doesn't jump out and bite you, right? So that that change that you're making doesn't prove to be more difficult than necessary. So we want to see a simple system that we can use easily, that we can maintain easily, and when we take shortcuts, when we accrue technical debt, that creates a system where we don't know that everything is in the right place. We don't know all the impacts of changing something. It's awesome when you have test coverage of every single thing in your system. And you're very confident that nothing is going to break when you change something because your tests will catch it. What happens if you've got 80% test coverage? 80% is a lot. Anybody here got 80% test coverage? It's awesome, but you still don't know for sure that nothing is going to break unless and your test will warn you, right? The other thing is that as we accumulate that debt, it tends to build up. It tends to accumulate. Anybody familiar with broken windows theory or the theory of moral hazard? All right, good. I'm getting some gaps. Got the energy going, I can tell. So, theory of moral hazard is everybody looks at what's already there and says, oh, there's a bunch of tech debt in there. People have cut corners. Obviously, I can do it too. Right? It's acceptable. If you leave stuff broken, it becomes more normal that it be broken. Oh, we'll just ignore that unit test, comment it out, and come back to it and fix it later. Did you ever fix it later? Did you ever go back and unignore those unit tests?
Don't have a time.
Don't have the time. Shipping is a feature, absolutely, and it is, right? But as we do that, it builds up and things get slower and slower until we get to the projects where you come in and it's been getting slower and slower and maybe they've forgotten some things and maybe we took some shortcuts for 5 or 6 years and we say, crap, that's unmaintainable, I need to rewrite the whole system. Which is good for contractors from a money perspective, not as good for the businesses, right? And then there are the knock-on effects, right? The places where technical debt in one place can affect other parts of the system, right? It can create caps on how well you can scale the system. It can create the inability to maintain the system because you can't find people with the right skill set, right? We built this in, I don't know, say Visual Basic. Not visualbasic.net, mind you, Visual Basic. How hard is it to find a Visual Basic programmer these days? Anybody know?
I'm available.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right there.
Where are you going to find out on the internet?
And you can still do anything faster on VB than you can anything else.
I'm a FoxPro programmer,
Same way.
okay?
I'm
But-
sorry to hear that.
That being the case, I can't say that I generally am looking for jobs in FoxPro right now. And the companies that are still in VB are not generally the companies that I'm going to say, hey, you're going to be doing stuff that's interesting to me to work on. All right? So, The debt that you incur, even retroactive debt, which is the point I'm sort of making here with VB, can accumulate. So what do we do about it? As much as we can, we simplify. Y'all are probably familiar with Yagnian Dry, right? Everybody knows, keep the code as simple as possible. Don't build stuff you don't need. Don't make systems more complex than you need. Anytime you want to go clean things up, it should remove a burden from you. If there is a terribly written part of your application that you look at once a year, should you go clean up the tech debt?
It runs with no problems, no.
As long as you only look at it once a year, right? As long as it's not costing you 2 weeks whenever you look at it once a year. But there's got to be some significant burden that you're removing. The result of removing tech debt should always be easier, not harder to understand and work with. And you should always understand that, this is going to be a little bit of tautology, you should always understand that you need to understand. Listen first. Find out what the system is doing. Make sure that removing that tech debt isn't going to introduce new problems. Make sure that you fully comprehend the system so that you can simplify it. Right? There's a reason we do red, green, refactor. It gives us a pattern to follow. And there's the old joke in the Agile circles about there's that fourth step in there that people forget about, right? Think. Think about what it is that you're doing and how it's going to improve things. When you go into remove tech debt, you can make things worse. How many times have you been on a project where somebody was like, oh, that design was horrible, I went in and I fixed it for us, and then a production system broke?
I've never had that happen.
Never. Okay? How many of you have been in a situation where somebody came into a project that you'd been working on for 6 months, 9 months, and had incurred some tech debt? Like, legitimately. You'd made some choices, you'd had to ship code that you weren't 100% proud of, and some smart young kid or smart old architect consultant or what have you comes in and says, wow, that's not the right way to do it. I'm going to totally revise this. And they did, and they were the only person who could understand what they had done. How maintainable is that? How useful is that to you as a project? Which is worse? The expert level solution that one person can maintain? The bad, well understood solution?
Neither.
Right? Let's make everything perfect, and then we'll be good, right? Except we rarely can do that. It's hard because you've got to convince people to pay the money, and you've got to always make the right decisions. And if anybody in this room can always make the right decisions, we should have a little talk, because I've got some ponies. There is always going to be an opportunity cost. How many of you have had the conversation with the product owner saying, we have got to pay down this tech debt now? And the product owner is like, okay, let's do that. You're the technical expert. I'm going to take your word for it. You say, we have to do this right now. I was really hoping to get this feature out that will make money for my business, but okay, we'll rewrite the app. Okay, we'll rewrite the module. There is legitimate grounds for that. Everybody agree? There are times when you do need to actually have that conversation with the product owner. But there's a cost. And the product owner is not going to get some feature delivered because you spent time working on your technical debt. Right? How fast does working on your technical debt pay off in terms of those inefficiencies that we talked to? Right? How much did that technical debt slow you down? If you spend 1 week working on fixing the technical debt, You need to earn back that 1 week that you spent on fixing it in savings from the inefficiency. So if that technical debt costs you 1 hour every time you ran across it, how many times do you have to run across it before it pays itself off? Something like 30, 40, right? Depending on whether we're counting ideal hours or business hours, etc. You have to hit that technical debt 40 times before it pays itself off for that 1 week you spent fixing it. So the solution to this is humility. It's not incurring the technical debt whenever you can. Right? Building stuff to keep yourself from incurring technical debt. Giving yourself the opportunity to not create technical debt by setting reasonable expectations at the start. Making the business understand the value of good design and give you the time to build it right in the first place. Understanding that restructuring and refactoring are not the same thing. And if you change the behavior of the system, you are no longer refactoring.
Are we talking about a 737 MAX?
Okay. So we were talking about investment a little bit ago. Let me ask you something. What percentage of professional investors beat the market on average?
7? Not many. 10%.
About 50%. You know why?
Because
Because the market follows what they do. So if all of them do really well, then the average of the market is up too, and it winds up as the median result, right? The mean in this case is very close to the median, but it's hard to beat the market because you're competing against people who have about equal amount of knowledge. How often do you beat the market in terms of making predictions on how much your tech debt is going to pay off? How many people in this room made a business case the last time they decided to pay off some tech debt in their software project? Oh, thank God. You're all in some sort of agile-like environment, right? Nobody here had to actually go and justify and make a business case for why I'm going to write these new test cases or what have you?
No, I mean,
And-
if you have agreement with a product owner that basically there is technical debt always there.
Sure.
And you say, okay, we spent about 30% or 40% on technical debt when we deliver the feature, so we fix the old stuff. you know.
Is your judgment on that, on what's worth fixing on technical debt, always right?
I mean, we define which priority is,
Sure.
but no, there is no calculation. I mean, how many time do we have to touch and how much time we waste? There is certainly no calculation there because there is no analytics for that stuff. But
So on your agile project, who defines priority?
uh,
Product owner,
both.
right? How does the product owner accurately define value, right? They are the keeper of value. How do they accurately define value on a technical system that they don't understand?
They don't define it. You define it.
So if I tell the product owner, this is terrible, this is going to be completely unmaintainable in the future, what's going to happen?
They may not care.
They may not care. They may say,
You get fired. But we have a deal.
you might get fired. It is possible. Is that really your experience, though? If you actually go to your product owner, I would hope that you have a better relationship with that than them, right? What are they going to say? They're going to say, okay, you're the expert. I trust you.
No.
No.
More likely they'll say, we'll get to it eventually.
It's all
What can you give me
depends.
now?
And why do they say that?
It's because lack of trust.
Exactly right. Because they've heard you say this before.
Not that,
Right?
Because
And so you are getting to a state where, there's got to be an equilibrium. And so they're a little less trusting, but still, if you say, like, we've got to get to it, often it will get done. The first time you ask for that. And then the second time you ask for it, there's I thought we just did that.
no, but I mean, it depends on how much the code base you have. And it's okay, you have a lot of existing code base. a lot of crap in it. We say, okay, you know, let's touch one thing at a time, and this is it.
Thank you. You just made my next point, which is take things in little steps. Don't rewrite the whole system at once. Iterate toward success. Make small changes. Why?
Still have to show value. I mean, you still have to continue to provide value as you go, even if it's a little bit less.
Yep.
While you're fixing things, it's a little bit of, I'm gonna give you a little bit of this, but I'm gonna fix this. It's gonna be less delivery this month, but next month we'll.
And not only that, how hard is it to understand if you're going to rewrite a whole system what the impact's going to be,
Oh yes.
compared to if you're going to rewrite a small module?
Well, other than that, it's you define velocity on your team, and this is it. And the technical, that part of the velocity.
Okay. And we have retrospectives as ways to improve the velocity of the team. We have the ability to say, hey, we didn't do this the way we wanted to last time. Let's do it better next time, or let's spend a little time cleaning it up. But having humility, thinking about the fact that you're not going to go make everything better. You're not smarter than everybody else who's ever done this. Think about that perspective that we're supposed to adopt when we go into our retrospectives of everybody involved made the best decisions they could with the information and the resources they were given at the time. I have a really hard time with this sometimes. I'll go into a new environment where I wasn't there when they made the decisions for why they incurred that technical debt, and I'll say, oh my God, I can't believe any engineer would possibly be so stupid as to have done this, whatever it is. And you know, that benefit of hindsight, it's wonderful. It means that I don't have to take into consideration any of the whole, it's nice to ship, or they didn't have all the information, or the system changed under them as they were writing it, or the data sources weren't all known, or what have you. So, as we go in, looking to fix tech debt, looking to clean things up, we want to decide, what is that balance? Because, as I was just mentioning, every time we ask the product owner for that permission to go fix tech debt, we are taking a loan against the social capital that we have with that product owner and with the business. Right? Value is important. If my changing the tech debt is if my paying down the tech debt is going to speed up development, make maintenance easier, etc., that is incredibly valuable and will pay off significantly over the long term. Next question about businesses. Has anybody been in a business where they had great long-term plans and the business stopped being a business? See, the thing about long-term investments is you got to be there for the long term. Cash flow is the #1 killer of businesses. It's not having a good idea or a good product. It's they make some bad decisions about where to keep their money, and they discover that the money coming in isn't balancing the money going out. So immediacy of that payoff is always a consideration when you're evaluating an investment. You have to have the funds to be able to make those investments. You have to have the credit with your product owners. You have to have the available development time to say, hey, here's a good opportunity to fix something I've been meaning to fix. If you are leveraged to the gills, it means you don't get to take out any more loans, right? So be careful about when you pay off your tech debt. Be careful about what tech debt you accrue so that you don't get into that situation where you don't get choices. I want to also note something for the developers in the room. Anybody in here a developer?
Finance.
All right. So, have you ever noticed that tech debt is dramatically more painful to you than it is to the business? Why? They don't see it. You don't see the users actually interacting with the software much of the time. You don't see the pain that the business users are experiencing. That's far away. You've got to go through like often 3 layers of people to hear about the pain that they're experiencing. whereas you actually touch the stuff that's causing you pain. Everybody familiar with the concept of foreshortening? Anybody want to guess what size those cars are? What's that?
Truck.
Right above the truck. You see the corner of somebody's face?
I thought it was a house.
Those cars are about that big. But they look big because they're close to you in this camera shot. Same concept applies when you're evaluating the value and the risk of things. It's easier for developers to overvalue technical things because they understand them. I don't know how to solve all the business problems that I'm asked to solve, but I do know how to fix the tech debt. Has anybody been in that situation where, like, I don't know how to solve that problem, but I know how to solve that problem, so I always seem to wind up working on that problem. I know what the next step is. I can just go do something concrete and fix it. That can lead to some bad habits. We can wind up overvaluing our experience at the cost of our users and our business owners. And then finally, there's that window for how long is your effort going to be spoken for? How long are you going to be spending fixing this tech debt before it goes out, before you start to see the returns, before you get payback on it? So, return on investment. First of all, beating inflation. I want to point out that anytime you invest, you got to get back more than you put in. Which means that if you choose to invest now, that return has to more than pay for itself over the course of the time that you're going to be working on it in a way that's better than the alternatives where you could have put that effort. So you not only have to improve their product in terms of the maintenance, but you also, when you took that 1 week, remember we said you'd have to hit that tech debt 40 times to break even? Breaking even is not enough because you lost a week's worth of working on something the business cared about. There's your inflation, right? There's that 1 week that you're later to the market and somebody might beat you to market or steal a march on you in terms of getting things out to your customers and maybe steal away some of your customers. The other thing that you have to remember, again, going back to the risk, right? Return and risk. What happens if it goes badly? Suppose you have a company where they're a startup and their funding depends on releasing things on certain dates. Should we do tech debt right before a release? Even if it's ugly? Even if we think we made a horrible mistake? Probably not. Because again, you got to be around to pay off that investment. The nice thing about certain kinds of investments, what we in the investment industry call all-weather assets, is that they perform well regardless of what the market is doing. Okay? If they perform well when the market goes down or the market goes up, we have some security in them. We try to build portfolios that are balanced against each other so that when one asset goes down, the other goes up in a correlated way that keeps us stable, keeps us able to keep shipping, keeps our jobs. Right? So we can pay it off little by little. We don't make big bets that leave us in a bad situation if things change. Finally, understanding your estimated versus your actual results. I think this tech debt will give us a benefit. Fine. How many of you think about tech debt that you've already paid off? I'm going to guess nobody in the room.
How do you measure?
How do you measure? If you can't measure it, how do you justify that you have actually done something worthwhile with that customer's money? Right? They're paying you that money to go clean things up. How do you know it was worth their time? So I think that's an excellent question. but I think it's a question we actually have to answer. I cleaned up this tech debt last week. Okay? I rewrote this class as an example. It's simpler to use now. Let me, a year from now, go back and see how many times have I touched that class in the last year. If it's none, then the maintenance fees hasn't paid off. It might be that it's a much simpler class now in terms of its usage, and that may be something we can measure separately.
But the question there is again, you mentioned the code coverage, for example, and it's again, I mean, yeah, you rewrite the class, you create a unit test, all this stuff. So when the time comes, when you have no idea when it comes, and you're not around, but you create a unit test, you write the code that actually is unit testable.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else who have no idea what's going on cannot screw up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's how much, now you put a dollar value on this baby.
So do that. Do exactly
No,
what
you put it. Nobody can put it.
Why not?
How
So
you can put it?
have you ever been saved by a unit test? I have. Been saved by a lot of unit tests. Ever keep track of that? Like, I don't care, put it on a whiteboard somewhere. How many times have I been saved this
But
month
you
by a
gone,
unit test?
You gone, and there's somebody else, and then somebody else came to actually address the code. Because
So
nobody
you were
knows
saved
what's
by
the
somebody
business
else's
rules.
unit tests,
Exactly.
right?
No, no,
And
no.
that's okay too.
I mean, another measurement is your velocity as a team, right? I mean, if you have a more maintainable code, more readable,
Yep.
and then it might be that your velocity increases, and then that can be a.
So you know what would be a really cool metric? Spend a couple of sprints not doing any tech debt cleanup and measure velocity and see if it's changing. And then spend a couple of sprints doing tech debt changes
But it
and
doesn't
see
change
how
anything.
much the change in investment in tech debt changes the amount of improvement in velocity.
Another thing that can happen also is when you deploy, when you have a problem and you have to open a ticket to fix that hot fix, right?
Mhm.
If you were having, let's put a number 10, and now that you are applying these technical debt fixes, and if those tickets start going down, that might be a reflection
Absolutely.
of those.
That's an excellent metric,
Right.
right?
Another-
Our problem is we don't tend to think about that, right? We don't tend to look back at those things that we've done, these investments that we've made in ourselves of, I'm going to write these unit tests, etc. And then we go to the product owners, to a new business, to a new consulting, client, etc. And we say, no, we have to do these things. It makes things better. It is known.
Well, the question is-
Okay, how much better? How much time, how much money should I invest in your unit test? And I think the answer is they're worthwhile investments.
But it's not the answer to put a sticker price on it. Worthwhile. What's worthwhile? Worthwhile for you is not worthwhile to some product owner, because you know what? It's easy for him to yell at you that something doesn't work. You know what I mean? And again, if it's a unit test not exposable, so they don't actually see it, they cannot actually verify it. They don't have a spreadsheet or whatever, some tool that actually can see, okay, this is my business rules, and they are actually matching. And if I change the business rule there, they change there. You know, there is no such a thing. You know?
So you've got a choice of either trading, I'm sorry, I'll let you jump in 1 second. You've got a choice of either trading on trust, which many of us do, and do successfully, or trading on data, and data can build trust, right? I mean, they're still going to have to trust you. It's not going to be the exact same as the last case. It's not going to be a perfect, I saved 4.2 hours on this bug because the code was better. Who knows, right? I didn't go down that path.
Going back to, when you have like a hot fix or a ticket, right, that you open, then you can say, well, my team has spent, in average a day to fix, right? So you can count, well, the money that we use for on all these resources. So if we reduce those tickets, and then that may be another way to
Absolutely.
measure, right?
And again, I'm not proposing that we be a purely spreadsheet-driven organization, despite the fact that I've worked for a few that would have liked to have been, right? I'm suggesting that evidence backs up trust. And even thinking about, am I accurate in what I've delivered, what I've promised, the investments that I've made, looking back at that, retrospecting, trying to keep track, paying it forward. One of the ideas that I've seen that I really like, and I've implemented a couple of times, but not as often as I would have liked to, because that's the way tech debt works, right? I love seeing the coin jar, that every time you invest in something, you take a poker chip or whatever out of the jar. Every time you see a benefit from that activity, you put a poker chip back in the jar. Right? It just gives you a kind of analog sense of, are you doing more than you're getting from it? Usually what I've found is, especially with things like unit tests, I actually do get significantly more. And then I can say, hey, look, product owner, I've saved myself this much time from the things I've suggested in the past. Maybe you should trust me on this next one. This next thing that I think you should let me rewrite, or what have you. So there's a couple of other smart people who have cool things to say about tech debt, when you should pay it down, how to deal with things like microservices. You may have heard of the names of a couple of these guys. Yes?
Of course.
All right. These in particular are some pretty good articles on technical debt. And I actually do recommend that you take a look at these. They're fairly thought-provoking. Steve McConnell talks a lot about intentional versus incidental debt and making those decisions that we've been talking about all night of, when do I want to intentionally incur debt because I want to get something out faster? I want to, as an example, write the POC in a language that is not the final production language because I don't want to get trapped into the situation where they say, but you wrote the POC, it's done. Let's put it in production. When do you intentionally take on that technical debt, saying, I'm going to force us to rewrite this later? And when do you try to avoid that incidental, oh crap, I have technical debt? Decisions are great. Information is great. Get as much of it as you can. Make as many decisions as you can. Make the decisions at the last responsible moment, but do it responsibly. Not, oh crap, the last responsible moment was 10 minutes ago. All right, here's your recap. It's okay to have some debt. You will have some debt. You're not looking to get into debt, but the way our economy works, the way our business works, you can't make decisions 100% correct every single time. You won't. It will accumulate over time. You will have to pay it down. But reducing debt can cost you if you don't do it at the right times with the right consideration for what the impact of reducing that debt can be. If you go and introduce bugs or create unmaintainable systems in the process of trying to reduce that debt. Be explicit about what you're borrowing against, whether you're paying, trading time against money or money against time. Future maintainability versus today's shipping. Okay. And finally, don't go broke. I already talked about tracking the cost and the return of your debt. Understand when you're making those decisions intentionally that you're not going to build the perfect solution. And have that conversation, right? Get to a point with your product owners where they understand that you're making trade-off decisions every day, and tech debt isn't something that's just hey, this is an exception. I could not only build you the perfect solution or the bad solution, I can build you any of these solutions along this spectrum. How much do you want? Do you want the $1 million solution? Oh, you have a $100,000 budget. I can still build you a system, but it's going to be a little different system. You want to show them your good intentions, that you have in mind their best interests, that you're letting them make decisions whenever possible, and your competency, that you have evidence to back up your gut feelings, the fact that you have a track record of having made the right decisions when you pay down your technical debt, so that you don't get that same attitude of, yeah, sure we do. Right? And above all, remember that you are literally borrowing the customer's money. When you pay down technical debt, they are spending money on a promise that you are making them that it will make things better. Better enough that it's worth them not spending that money on you building something for them that they will be able to use in their business. Does all that make sense? Okay. I am more than happy to take questions. To answer Jay's earlier questions, we are hiring. Got lots of positions. Feel free to talk to us about it. Don't forget that there's an Agile Shift conference the 12th. We're running out of tickets, so get it now if you want to come. Thank you, folks. Questions?
Thank you for joining us for the March 2019 meeting of the Houston.net Users Group. Our meetings are held on the second Thursday of every month at the Improving Houston office at 10111 Richmond Avenue. Be there at 6:30 as we kick things off with pizza and prizes. If you happen to be in Houston on any second Thursday of the month, we would love for you to join us.